the cold grey hours before dawn, a man's world can shrink to the size of the metal cup in his hands. For a private from Ohio, huddled against the steel bulkhead of a transport ship pitching in the English Channel, that world was the bitter warmth of coffee, thick with sugar. It was the only thing that could cut through the greasy smell of diesel and vomit, the salt spray that tasted like tears, and the low animal hum of 1,000 other nervous men. He wasn't thinking of the grand strategy, of the maps lined with arrows in distant firelit tents. He was thinking of the breakfast he'd just eaten hours before, powdered eggs, greasy bacon, and bread that was somehow both tough and damp. He was thinking of the chocolate bar in his pack, a D-Ration bar, scientifically designed to taste just bad enough that you wouldn't eat it unless you were truly desperate. And he was wondering, with a simple, profound clarity that cut through the fear, what his next meal would be, and if he would be alive to eat it. That single, unspoken question, multiplied by more than 150,000, was the secret pulse beneath the skin of Operation Overlord. Before the first bullet was fired, before the first boot touched the sand, the invasion of Europe had already begun. It had begun not as a battle, but as a colossal, unprecedented problem of arithmetic and appetite. It was a challenge of logistics so immense it bordered on the impossible, a ghost army of planners, cooks, and clerks fighting a war of numbers that would determine the fate of the soldiers long before they ever saw the enemy. For an army, as the old saying goes, marches on its stomach. But this was no mere army. This was a tidal wave of humanity poised to break upon a fortress, and it was hungry. By the spring of 1944, southern England had ceased to be a simple countryside of hedgerows and villages. It had become a vast, breathing machine of war, the largest military staging ground in the history of the world. The ancient landscape itself seemed to groan under the weight. Quiet country lanes, built for horse carts and Austin 7s, were now choked with an endless convoy of Sherman tanks, jeep-towed artillery, and 6x6 trucks, their engines a constant throbbing growl that never ceased day or night. Farmers would look up from their fields to see not cows grazing on a distant hill, but the dark, angled silhouettes of 1,000 tanks parked hull to hull, their gun barrels pointing south like a silent steel forest that had grown overnight. Public parks and manicured estates disappeared under seas of olive-drab tents, each one holding a handful of the more than 1.5 million American soldiers who had crossed the Atlantic in a steady, unceasing stream. They called it the friendly invasion, but it was an occupation nonetheless. The Americans were everywhere, their accents and their easy confidence filling the pubs, their pockets full of money, and their hands full of things the British had long since forgotten: chewing gum, cigarettes, nylon stockings. They brought with them a sense of scale, of overwhelming power and resources, that was both reassuring and deeply alien to a nation that had been bled white by 5 years of total war. For the British people, life was a daily exercise in making do. Their food was rationed to the ounce, their clothes were patched, their cities were scarred by the Blitz, and their nights were still cloaked in the suffocating darkness of the blackout. Into this world of scarcity and fatigue, the Americans brought a whirlwind of energy. But they also brought their own colossal needs. Every single soldier, whether from Kansas or from Kent, was a unit of consumption. He required a precise number of calories to function, a specific quantity of water to drink, a calculated weight in ammunition to fight, and a measured space to sleep. Multiply that by millions, and you begin to see the true nature of the challenge that faced the Allied High Command. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the man tasked with orchestrating this monumental undertaking, knew this better than anyone. He knew that the glorious charges and heroic stands that would be written into the history books were merely the final, visible acts of a drama whose most critical scenes were played out on ledger books and loading manifests. The war would be won or lost not on the beaches, but in the warehouses. It was a war of supply, a contest of logistics. And at the very heart of that contest was the most basic human need of all: food. The numbers are so large they become abstract, losing their meaning. The plan required stockpiling, preparing, and shipping over 20 million individual meals, just to sustain the initial assault force through the first few critical days. 20 million meals. It is a figure that defies easy comprehension. It was a mountain of food, thousands of tons of flour for the field bakeries that would work around the clock, producing hundreds of thousands of loaves of bread a day. Millions of tins of processed meat, spam, corned beef, pork and beans, the unglamorous but life-sustaining staples of the soldier's diet. Mountains of dehydrated potatoes and powdered milk, enough coffee to fill an Olympic swimming pool, and enough sugar to turn it into syrup. Every single item, from the salt shakers to the slabs of beef, had to be sourced, inspected, packaged, catalogued, stored in a sprawling network of depots, and then organized for embarkation on specific ships headed for specific beaches. This was the domain of the Quartermaster Corps, the great unsung engine of the Allied victory. Their work was a complex tapestry woven from thousands of individual threads. It involved nutritionists in Washington, D.C., calculating the precise caloric and vitamin content needed to keep a fighting man at peak efficiency. It involved purchasing agents scouring the globe for resources, diverting entire harvests from civilian use. It involved chemists and food technicians in laboratories, perfecting methods of preservation and packaging, designing ration packs that could survive being submerged in salt water, dropped from a plane, or crushed under the weight of a truck. The K ration, the C ration, the emergency D-Ration bar. Each was a marvel of nutritional engineering, designed to deliver fuel to the human body in the most efficient way possible under the most brutal conditions imaginable. But it was always about more than mere fuel. The planners understood a deep and fundamental truth about the nature of a soldier. A man fights with his spirit as much as with his weapon, and nothing can crush that spirit faster than an empty stomach or the gnawing misery of inedible food. A hot meal in the midst of chaos was not a luxury, it was a weapon. It was a tactical tool, a tangible link to a world of warmth and safety, a reminder of what was being fought for. The promise of that meal was a powerful motivator, the memory of the last one, a small comfort against the encroaching darkness. And so, alongside the crates of ammunition and plasma, were loaded the mobile kitchens, the field bakeries and the precious stores of so-called comfort items, the cigarettes, the candy, the small things that could momentarily make a man forget he was caught in the crucible of history. As May bled into June, the great machine reached its peak. The south of England was a coiled spring, wound tight with tension and power. The ships, packed to the gunwales with men and the 10,000 things they needed to live and to fight, now crowded every port and estuary, awaiting the final word. The men checked their equipment, wrote their letters home, and waited. They ate their meals, thousands upon thousands of them, cooked in sprawling mess halls and field kitchens, a final taste of relative normalcy before the storm. The greatest amphibious invasion ever conceived was ready. Its success now depended on the courage of its men, the whims of the weather, and the flawless execution of a plan to deliver 20 million meals to the doorstep of hell. The promise of a meal is poetry, but its delivery is a brutal form of mathematics. For the planners of Operation Overlord, this was the central, unblinking truth. The flawless execution they sought was not a matter of hope or courage, but of cold, hard logistics, a science of movement and supply on a scale that strained the very limits of industrial civilization. It was a problem of physics, of tonnage and friction, of calories and combustion. 20 million meals were not an abstract goal. They were a specific weight, a specific volume, a physical reality that had to be moved from factories half a world away to the foxholes of Normandy. And every step of that journey was a complex engineering problem to be solved. The process began not in the kitchens of England, but in the sprawling production lines of America and the Commonwealth. The calculations were staggering. The Quartermaster Corps operated on a simple, terrifying calculus. One man in combat required approximately 6.92 pounds of supplies per day. Of that, 4.3 pounds was his subsistence, his food, and its packaging. For the initial assault force of 156,000 men, this meant nearly 340 tons of food were needed for the first 24 hours alone. And that was just the beginning. The plan called for 30 full days of reserves to be landed for every soldier put ashore. The math scaled into the astronomical. Millions of men requiring tens of thousands of tons of sustenance, all to be stockpiled in the staging areas of southern England. This logistical mountain was composed of more than 500 different food items from sacks of flour weighing 100 pounds each to tiny salt tablets, all catalogued, palletized, and tracked with fanatical precision. To move this mountain across the Atlantic was the first great engineering feat. Convoys of Liberty ships, each capable of carrying over 10,000 tons of cargo, steamed eastward, a lifeline of sustenance protected by a screen of destroyers. In England, this river of supply poured into vast depots, sprawling cities of crates and boxes, designated by cryptic codes like G25 or Q112. Here the rations were broken down into operational units. The 10-in-1 ration, a marvel of packaging designed to feed 10 men for one day, was a cornerstone. Its corrugated cardboard box, measuring just over 1 cubic foot, contained 5 different menus to ward off monotony. A typical box held canned bacon, cereal, biscuits, soluble coffee, powdered milk, jam, and tins of processed cheese, alongside meat units like pork and beans or beef stew. The entire package weighed 49 pounds and provided a calculated 4,300 calories per man, the precise figure deemed necessary to fuel a body under the extreme stress of combat. Getting these boxes from the depot to the beach was the next link in the chain. This is where the true machinery of the invasion revealed itself. The food was loaded onto landing ship, tank vessels, the LSTs. These were not elegant ships. They were massive, flat-bottomed workhorses, floating warehouses with cavernous cargo bays and bow doors that opened like a great maw. An LST could carry 2,100 tons of cargo, which could translate to over 85,000 individual 10-in-1 rations, enough to feed a full division for nearly a day. Packed tight within these ships, alongside tanks and artillery, were the GMC CCKW trucks, the legendary Deuce and a Half, each preloaded with 5 tons of supplies. The plan was for the LSTs to beach themselves at high tide, open their doors, and disgorge these trucks directly onto the sand, creating an instant, mobile supply chain. But the beaches of Normandy would not be so accommodating. When the carefully laid plans met the chaos of combat, a different set of machines took over. On Omaha Beach, where the ramps of the LSTs could not reach the shore, the DUKW amphibious truck became the lifeline. This 6-wheeled, 5-ton truck, encased in a watertight hull with a propeller at the back, could drive off the ramp of a transport ship miles out to sea, navigate the churning waves, and drive straight up the beach to a supply dump. Each DUKW could carry 5,000 pounds of cargo, roughly 100 of the 10-in-1 ration boxes, on each perilous trip. They were the steel ducts that kept the beachhead from starving in the first critical hours. Once ashore, the engineering challenge transformed. The food was there, but it was cold. A hot meal was a different problem entirely, and its solution was the M1937 field range. This was no simple campfire. It was a self-contained gasoline-powered unit, a 200-pound beast of steel and ingenuity. Its twin burners, roaring like jet engines, could burn 1.5 gallons of gasoline per hour, generating enough heat to boil water in 35 minutes or fry bacon for 100 men. 2 of these ranges, mounted in the back of a Deuce and a Half with pantry equipment and work tables, constituted a mobile field kitchen capable of feeding a 250-man company. For D-Day, these kitchens were landed with the 2nd and 3rd waves, their crews tasked with the near impossible. Find a semi-sheltered spot, get the burners lit, and turn cold rations into hot chow while the battle still raged around them. The ambition went even further. For the planners, even hot stew was not enough. They wanted to bring the ultimate symbol of civilization to the front: fresh bread. This was the task of the Mobile Bakery Company. Each company was equipped with 4 massive trailer-mounted baking ovens, each capable of producing 700 1.5-pound loaves every 12 hours. These ovens were intricate machines, with diesel-fired burners and complex ducting to ensure an even bake. To support them required a chain of specialized equipment: gasoline-powered dough mixers, water trailers, and prime movers to haul the massive oven units. Within weeks of the landing, these bakeries were ashore, churning out thousands of loaves a day, the smell of baking bread a surreal counterpoint to the stench of cordite and death. None of this, not the trucks, not the kitchens, not the bakeries, could function without the ultimate currency of modern warfare: fuel. The logistics of petroleum were even more daunting than those of food. A single armored division could consume 80,000 gallons of gasoline in a single day of offensive operations. The deuce and a half trucks, the vital link in the supply chain, achieved a grim 2 to 4 miles per gallon when loaded and driving through mud. The demand was insatiable. Initially, it was met with 5-gallon jerry cans, millions of them, filled in England, stacked on pallets and unloaded by hand on the beaches, a slow, dangerous and back-breaking process. The ultimate engineering solution to this problem was one of the best-kept secrets of the war, Operation Pluto for pipeline under the ocean. This was an undertaking of breathtaking audacity. 2 types of pipelines were developed. The first, known as Hayes, was essentially a hollowed-out, lead-armored submarine telegraph cable, 3 inches in diameter. The second, Hamel, was a more flexible steel pipe of the same diameter. To lay these pipes, giant floating spools were constructed, called conundrums. These were immense structures 90 feet in diameter and weighing 1,600 tons when full of pipe, towed across the channel by tugboats. Starting in August 1944, these pipelines began to pump fuel directly from Shanklin on the Isle of Wight to Cherbourg. By the war's end, a web of 17 of these pipelines was delivering over 1 million gallons of fuel to the continent every single day, an invisible subterranean supply line that was the true artery of the Allied advance. It was this silent, unseen flow of fuel that powered the trucks that carried the rations to the mobile kitchens, that heated the food that gave a single exhausted soldier the 4,500 calories he needed to pick up his rifle and take one more step towards Berlin. The engineering of victory was not just in the guns and the tanks. It was in the quiet hum of a pipeline on the seabed, the roar of a gasoline stove, and the simple, profound act of delivering a warm meal to the edge of the world. But that was the design. That was the grand, intricate machine of war as drawn on a map, in a warm, well-lit room in London. On the ground, in the fields and forests of France, that machine often seized up, choked by the grit and friction of reality. For every pipeline that hummed with lifeblood, there was a bridge blown to pieces by a retreating enemy. For every convoy of trucks that successfully reached the front, there was another bogged down in mud that could swallow a man whole, its drivers fighting a desperate battle not against the enemy, but against the land itself. The grand strategy of generals is one thing. The visceral truth for the soldier in the foxhole is another entirely. And for him, the war was not a line on a map, but the gnawing emptiness in his stomach. The colossal effort of the Red Ball Express, a continuous loop of trucks driven primarily by African-American soldiers, was a testament to this struggle. These men drove for days without sleep, their eyes burning from exhaustion, their hands cramped on the wheel. They drove through sniper alleys and under the threat of Luftwaffe strafing runs, their cargo of fuel and ammunition making them rolling bombs. But even their heroism could not pave over every road or mend every broken axle. When their trucks failed, the line stopped. And when the line stopped, the silence that followed was terrifying. It was a silence filled with the click of an empty rifle bolt, the shiver of a man in a summer uniform facing an autumn wind, the hollow echo in a soldier's belly. In the dense, claustrophobic hedgerow country of Normandy, the advance was measured not in miles, but in bloody, agonizing yards. Here, the supply chain was stretched to its breaking point. A private from Ohio, huddled in a ditch that smelled of damp earth and cordite, might go for days on nothing but the infamous K-ration. He would pry open the wax-coated box to find his meals for the day, a small tin of processed cheese that tasted of chemicals and regret, a handful of hard biscuits that could break a tooth, a fruit bar that was a dense, sugary brick, and 4 cigarettes. The D-bar, a chocolate ration so dense with calories it was designed not to be tasty, to prevent soldiers from eating it too quickly, became a form of currency and a source of bitter jokes. Men said you could use it to patch a tire or knock a man unconscious. Eating it was a chore, a grim necessity that offered fuel but no comfort. It was food stripped of all its humanity, and in its place was a constant, dull hunger that sandpapered the nerves and drained the will. That private didn't dream of victory. He dreamed of his mother's fried chicken, of a glass of cold milk, of a slice of apple pie. He dreamed of a meal that didn't taste like war, But it was in the winter of 1944, in the dark and frozen stillness of the Ardennes forest, that the true human cost of a broken supply line was written in the snow. When the German offensive tore through the American lines in what would become the Battle of the Bulge, thousands of men were cut off, surrounded, and left to fend for themselves in some of fatest cold Europe had seen in decades. They were men of the 101st Airborne at Bastogne, men of the 28th Infantry Division shattered along the Siegfried Line. They had been sent into the forest with gear meant for a milder season. Their boots were not waterproof, and soon their feet were submerged in a constant slushy ice bath. Trench foot set in, turning feet black and numb, the flesh dying on the bone. The cold was a living entity, a predator that stalked them relentlessly. It crept through the thin fabric of their coats, seeped into their bones and refused to leave. Metal burned the skin. A man who touched his rifle with a bare hand would leave a layer of flesh behind. At night, with temperatures plunging far below zero, they would dig their foxholes in the frozen ground, the shock of each strike of the entrenching tool vibrating up their arms. They would huddle together, 3 or 4 men, not for camaraderie, but for the shared, meager warmth of their bodies, their breath pluming in the frigid air like ghosts. Sleep was a gamble. To fall too deep into it was to risk never waking up, to simply freeze solid in the unforgiving earth. And then there was the hunger. Rations ran out in days. The neatly planned 4,500 calories per man became a fantasy. A soldier was lucky to have a single D-bar to break into pieces and savor over an entire day, letting a small shard melt on his tongue to make it last. They ate snow to quench their thirst, a dangerous act that lowered their core body temperature even further. A story is told of a squad, surrounded and starving, who found a single frozen turnip in a destroyed Belgian farmhouse. They passed it around, each man taking one solemn bite, a sacrament in the heart of hell. Food became the singular focus of their existence, an obsession that eclipsed even the fear of the enemy they could hear moving through the trees. And with the food went the ammunition. The sound of an M1 Garand firing its 8th and final round, that distinctive ping of the en bloc clip ejecting, was usually a comforting signal to reload. In the Ardennes, it became a sound of pure terror. It meant you were one step closer to being helpless. Orders came down the line. Don't fire unless you can see their belt buckle. Every single bullet was a precious, finite resource. Men crept out of their foxholes under the cover of darkness, risking death to scavenge clips from the bodies of the fallen, both friend and foe. To have a rifle and no bullets was the ultimate nightmare. It turned a soldier into a spectator at his own execution. He could do nothing but wait, his weapon a useless club in his numb hands, listening to the approaching crunch of German boots in the snow. For these men, the war was not about grand strategy or the marvels of logistics. It was about the searing pain of a frost-bitten finger. It was about the desperate animal craving for a single bite of something warm. It was about the sickening weight of a rifle that could no longer fire. The 20 million meals were more than just sustenance. They were a promise that you were not forgotten, that somewhere, beyond the horizon of trees and snow, a vast and powerful nation was still behind you. For the men shivering in the Ardennes, that promise had been broken. Their victory was not one of supply, but of pure, unadulterated human endurance. They held the line not because they were well-fed or well-armed, but because they refused to break. The cost of that winter is not measured in the number of shells fired or gallons of fuel consumed, but in the pieces of themselves those men left behind in the frozen soil of Belgium, a price that can never be fully calculated. And then, a new sound. Not the crack of a rifle or the crump of a mortar, but a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from the bones of the earth itself. It was a sound that had been absent for weeks, a sound many had forgotten existed. It was the sound of engines, thousands of them. The sky, for so long a merciless grey ceiling of cloud and snow, finally broke. Sunlight, pale and weak but undeniably present, cut through the frozen air, and with it came the planes. C-47s, lumbering angels of corrugated steel, flying in formation so vast they blotted out the new sun. From their bellies a new kind of snow began to fall, not the white flakes of winter, but a blizzard of green, brown, and white parachutes. They drifted down into the shattered forests, into the clearings near Bastogne, into the outstretched hands of men who had been living on memories and melting snow. This was the climax. It was not a bayonet charge or a tank assault. The turning point of the battle was the sound of a canvas supply bundle hitting the ground. It was the frantic tearing open of a crate to find not just K rations, but medicine, plasma, batteries for the radios, and ammunition. Box after box of 30 caliber rounds, clips of 8 that felt heavier than gold. The broken promise was mended from the air. A man weeps, not from pain, but from the sudden overwhelming scent of brewing coffee. He holds a chocolate D-bar in his hand like a holy relic, a piece of a world he thought he had lost forever. The distinctive ping of an ejected Garand clip was no longer a sound of dread, but a sound of defiance. It was the sound of a great industrial power finally remembering its sons, reaching across an ocean and a continent and a winter storm to place a weapon back in their hands. The tide did not turn because of one general's brilliant plan, but because the vast, intricate logistical river that had been frozen solid had finally thawed and begun to flow again. The 20 million meals and all the materiel that came with them had found their way home. When the fighting stopped and the spring thaw finally came, it did not bring rebirth, not at first. It brought a reckoning. The snow receded like a bandage being pulled from a terrible wound, and the land showed what lay beneath. The Ardennes forest, an ancient place of fairy tales and quiet hunts, had been transformed into a graveyard. It was a forest of skeletons, of splintered firs and shattered oaks standing as mute witnesses. The ground itself was a museum of the battle's fury. A helmet, pierced cleanly through. A single frozen boot, laces still tied. A mess kit, bent and rusted, half buried in the mud next to the brass casings of a machine gun belt. The farmers who owned that land came back to their fields, not with plows, but with buckets. For generations, their families would know the iron harvest. Every spring, the earth would offer up its bitter crop. Shell fragments, rifle barrels, the twisted metal of a tank tread, unexploded ordnance that still held its deadly promise. They were ploughing a landscape seeded with the iron of a distant war, a constant metallic reminder of the winter the world tore itself apart in their backyards. The land remembers. The trees that survived bear the scars in their rings, a dark, compressed memory of 1944. The soil itself carries the memory, the faint traces of oil and cordite and human grief absorbed into the very fabric of the place. To walk through those woods today is to feel a quiet that is heavy with noise, a peace that was purchased at a terrible price. In the end, the story of D-Day and the campaign that followed is not just a story of courage, but a story of calories and calculations. It is the story of the 20 million meals, but also the billions of gallons of fuel, the millions of bandages, the countless tons of steel. It was a war won by the quartermaster as much as the rifleman. It was a victory of logistics, a testament to the idea that an army is a living creature that must be fed. Its lifeblood, a constant flow of beans and bullets. Each can of Spam was a small, greasy testament to a nation's ability to project its will across the sea. Each 5-gallon jerry can of gasoline was a measure of industrial might, a promise of mobility and power. But we must never forget the exchange rate. For every crate unloaded on Omaha Beach, a price was paid. For every meal consumed in a frozen foxhole, a sacrifice was made. The grand, abstract numbers of the supply chain resolve into the singular, terrified face of a boy from Ohio, huddled in the dark. The marvel of the Red Ball Express is measured in the exhaustion of the driver who hasn't slept in 3 days. The victory is real, the liberation undeniable. But the tools of that victory were forged in fire and delivered through chaos, and they left indelible marks on the land and on the souls of the men who wielded them. The 20 million meals fed an army and helped save the world. But the echoes of that great and terrible feast still whisper in the quiet woods of Europe, a story of hunger and hope, of endurance and deliverance, a permanent scar on the memory of the earth.